The red emergency lights pulsed across the faces of Summit Technologies' best engineers, their expressions a mixture of confusion and mounting panic. The rhythmic flashing cast an almost surreal glow throughout the subterranean data center, where the constant hum of servers had risen to a dangerous whine. Digital displays on the wall flashed critical warnings, the core temperature of their primary servers climbing 1 degree per minute. Rachel Davis stood with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her CEO posture intact, despite the chaos unfolding around her. At 42, she had weathered many corporate storms, but never one that threatened to literally melt the foundation of the company her father had built. The massive screen above the central console displayed a merciless countdown, 43 minutes until system failure. What exactly are we looking at? Her voice cut through the tension, precise and controlled. The lead engineer glanced up from his station, sweat beading on his forehead. The magnetic lock on the main coolant valve has failed. We're locked out of the system. Temperature's rising and we can't stop it. At this rate, we'll lose everything. 30 years of data, all client accounts, the entire network. Complete meltdown. Rachel's mind calculated the implications, hundreds of millions in losses, thousands of affected clients, and a blow to Summit Technologies' reputation that they might never recover from. Beside her, Michael Keating, the company's COO, paced in tight circles, his phone pressed against his ear. "I don't care who you have to wake up." Michael's voice was a venomous whisper as he barked into the phone. "Find me someone who can fix this system now. This is not a drill. We have less than an hour." The chief engineer shook his head. "This system is proprietary. We've tried every override code, every manual reset. Nothing's working." It's as if someone built a kill switch directly into the architecture. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Her father had been obsessive about security protocols, but this seemed beyond paranoid. A system designed to self-destruct, it didn't make sense. The heavy security door at the far end of the room hissed open and the engineers turned expectantly, hoping for reinforcements. The man who entered wasn't wearing the expected corporate uniform or even the casual attire of their tech consultants. He wore faded work pants and a worn leather jacket that had seen better decades. He carried a weathered metal toolbox, its surface pitted with rust and age. The security guard behind him looked apologetic. "Mr. Keating, this is the repair specialist you requested." Michael ended his call abruptly, his face contorting in disbelief. "I asked for an emergency systems specialist, not a janitor." But the stranger didn't seem offended or even concerned with Michael's reaction. Instead, he moved with quiet purpose, his eyes scanning the room with unsettling familiarity. He was perhaps in his late 40s with strong hands marked by years of physical work and eyes that carried a weight beyond mere technical knowledge. "I'm David Walker," he said, simply setting his toolbox down with a solid thunk that seemed to silence the room for a moment. "I understand you have a coolant lock issue." Rachel barely registered his words. Her attention had fixed on the faded emblem stenciled on the side of his toolbox, a distinctive gear surrounding an atom. It was a logo she had only ever seen in her father's old photographs, one that Summit Technologies hadn't used in 3 decades. "Why is my company's logo on your toolbox?" Her question sliced through the tension, sudden and sharp. David didn't flinch under her scrutiny. "It's the original design, one you haven't used in 30 years. The room fell into deeper silence, the whining servers and flashing alerts momentarily forgotten. The engineers turned from their screens, attention captured by the strange confrontation unfolding amid their crisis. Michael stepped forward, his customary corporate smoothness replaced by something harder. "This is a restricted area. How did you get clearance to be here?" "You asked for someone who could fix your system." David's voice remained even, but his eyes shifted to Michael, holding his gaze a beat too long. "I'm the only one who can." A flicker of something, recognition fear, passed across Michael's features, quickly masked by renewed hostility. "Security, I want his credentials checked again, and Pisho." "Because this belonged to my father, Robert Walker," David interrupted, his quiet words carrying undeniable weight that halted Michael mid-sentence. "He was the 3rd founder of this company." The revelation rippled through the room. Rachel felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. She had grown up hearing stories of Summit Technologies' founding, the brilliant partnership between her father, James Davis, and Michael's father, William Keating. Never once had she heard of a 3rd founder. "That's impossible," she said, though the logo staring back at her suggested otherwise. Michael recovered his composure, his voice hardening. This is absurd. We're in the middle of an emergency. Security escort him. The temperature gauge just hit 82 degrees. The chief engineer called out, panic edging back into his voice. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. David turned toward the main server cabinet, ignoring Michael completely. This isn't a random failure. The system is trapped in a feedback loop designed to cascade once triggered. When the core temperature hits 90 degrees, it won't just wipe your data. It'll send a power surge that will physically destroy your primary servers. How could you possibly know that? Rachel demanded. Because my father built it that way, David answered, kneeling beside the main console and unlatching his toolbox. When did the problem start? The chief engineer glanced at his logs. System ran its weekly diagnostic about an hour ago. That's when the temperature began rising. David nodded as if confirming a theory. The cascade was triggered by an encrypted command sent to the server 3 days ago, set to activate during the routine diagnostic. Inside his toolbox was not the chaotic jumble of tools Rachel had expected, but a meticulously organized collection of custom instruments, each nestled in worn velvet lining. David selected what looked like a modified voltmeter with brass fittings that seemed wildly out of place next to the cutting-edge technology surrounding them. This is ridiculous, Michael snapped, his face flushing. You expect us to believe you can fix a quantum-cooled server array with antique junk from a rusty toolbox? David didn't bother responding. With practiced precision, he located an unmarked access port near the base of the server cabinet, one that none of the engineers had even noticed, and attached his device using a pair of specialized clips. Your father, James Davis, was the architect, David said to Rachel, his fingers adjusting dials on his device. He could take my father's visions and make them practically implementable. William Keating was the salesman. He secured the funding, built the client relationships. He paused, looking up at her with eyes that seemed to carry decades of buried truth. But my father, Robert Walker, was the inventor. The heart of Summit's technology has always been his design. If that were true, his name would be on the founding documents, Rachel countered, though doubt had begun to creep into her voice. It was, until it wasn't. David turned his attention back to his work, attaching a small brass key into a keyhole on his device. My father believed in balance. In every system he built, for every lock there was a key, for every fail-safe a protocol. The whine of the overheating servers had reached a painful pitch. The temperature display now read 86 degrees. Several engineers had backed away from the cabinets as if physical distance might save them from the impending disaster. It's almost done, David said, turning a final dial on his device. A soft green light flickered on, and for just a moment, a line of code flashed on the main diagnostic screen. RW protocol engaged. David let out a long breath and typed a rapid sequence of commands into the terminal. For a heartbreaking moment, nothing happened. The temperature gauge crept to 88 degrees. Then came a deep mechanical groan as the main coolant pumps kicked back into operation. A wave of cold air washed through the room, and the high-pitched whine of the servers began to descend. The red numbers on the temperature gauge finally mercifully began to fall to 84. A wave of relieved cheers erupted from the engineers. But Rachel's focus remained fixed on David, who was calmly packing away his equipment. Michael stood utterly still, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he turned and walked out, the heavy security door hissing shut behind him. His silent retreat felt more ominous than any outburst would have been. The emergency lights ceased their pulsing as the system returned to normal status. The chief engineer approached Rachel, barely containing his amazement. I've never seen anything like that. The guy just knew exactly what to do. Have everyone clear the room, Rachel ordered. I need to speak with Mr. Walker privately. The engineers filed out their curious glances, bouncing between Rachel and David. Rachel waited until they were alone. Only then did she allow her CEO mask to slip slightly. You just saved my company, she said, the words feeling inadequate against the weight of what had happened. I saved my father's work, David corrected, closing his toolbox with a soft click. The elevator ride to Rachel's penthouse office was thick with unspoken questions. 2 security guards stood at the rear of the car, their presence a formality that seemed pointless after what had just transpired. The real power in the small space existed in the quiet tension between the CEO in her tailored suit and the repairman in his worn work jacket. Rachel's office was a testament to minimalist corporate power, a vast space dominated by a single slab of black marble that served as her desk, positioned before floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city lights below. The space contained no family photos, no personal touches beyond a single abstract sculpture that conveyed strength through simplicity. "Sit," she said, gesturing to one of two leather chairs facing her desk. David placed his toolbox beside the chair before sitting, looking distinctly out of place in the sterile executive environment. Rachel didn't immediately take her own seat. Instead, she stood at the window, her silhouette framed against the cityscape, gathering her thoughts. "I want the whole story," she finally said, turning to face him. "No theories, no assumptions, just what you know to be fact." David took a measured breath. "My father, Robert Walker, was the true heart of Summit Technologies. He created the core architecture your company still uses today, though it's been built upon and modified. Your father, James Davis, was the one who saw the business potential in my father's innovations. He structured the company, designed the corporate roadmap. William Keating brought in the investors and broke down doors to get meetings. In the beginning, they were perfectly balanced: the inventor, the architect, and the hammer." Rachel's face remained carefully neutral, but her mind was racing through the implications. "My father never once mentioned a third founder. They were equal partners." David continued, a flicker of inherited pain crossing his features. "A three-way split signed on a napkin in a diner before they had your father's lawyer formalize it. My father trusted them both completely." He paused. "That was his mistake." Rachel finally sat down, the immense marble desk between them, suddenly feeling like a barrier she didn't want. "Continue." "The company grew faster than anyone anticipated. My father stayed focused on the technology, on creating the future. He didn't pay attention to stock certificates or legal filings. William Keating handled that with your father's approval." David leaned forward slightly. "They started issuing new classes of shares, diluting my father's stake without his knowledge. They'd have him sign complex documents telling him they were patent protections or funding arrangements, when in reality he was signing away his own company piece by piece." Rachel felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. "My father was a man of integrity." Was he? David's question wasn't angry, just quietly challenging. Or was he a man who let his partner do the dirty work while he looked the other way? William Keating was the aggressor, but your father enabled him. The accusation hung in the air between them. Rachel wanted to defend her father, to dismiss David's story as the bitter fiction of a man with an agenda. But the logo on the toolbox, the kill switch in the system, the way David had known exactly how to save them when all their experts had failed. "When they were ready," David continued, "they called a board meeting that my father didn't even know about, because they had already removed him from the board through documents he had unwittingly signed. They accused him of erratic behavior, of being a liability to the company's stability. They used his obsessive focus on his work against him. And then they offered him a settlement that was an insult, a fraction of what his stake was worth. When he refused, William threatened to destroy his reputation, to blacklist him from the entire industry." David's calm facade cracked slightly, decades-old anger flashing in his eyes. "My father was an inventor, not a fighter. They broke him. He walked away with nothing but this toolbox and a box of his notes. They changed the logo, rewrote the company history, and erased Robert Walker from existence." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of accusation. Rachel walked slowly back to her desk and sat down, feeling suddenly small behind the massive slab of marble. "Why now, Mr. Walker?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why, after all this time?" The question seemed to pull David back to the present. The anger faded from his eyes, replaced by a raw vulnerability that felt out of place in the sterile corporate office. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a worn wallet, extracting a small, folded photograph which he slid across the desk. It showed a young girl with bright, intelligent eyes and a smile that could light up a room, though a small nasal cannula for oxygen was visible across her face. "That's my daughter, Emily," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's 8. She has cystic fibrosis." He took a breath, steadying himself. "There's an experimental gene therapy treatment that could save her life, but it costs more money than I'll ever see. The doctors say it's her only real chance." If, however, the corporate armor Rachel had built over decades of business cracked slightly, she stared at the picture of the smiling child, seeing not an obstacle to her company's stability, but a little girl fighting for her future. "I'm not here for revenge, Ms. Davis," David said quietly. "I'm here because I'm a father who's running out of time." Rachel looked up from the photograph, her CEO mind reasserting control. "This is an incredible story, Mr. Walker, but it remains just that, a story. The corporate records are clear. The history is written. Do you have any proof, any documents, anything beyond your father's word in this toolbox?" David's shoulders slumped slightly. "They took everything. The contracts, the legal files, all of it. But my father was a genius, and he knew they would. He told me before he died that he hid the one thing they could never find, the original signed partnership agreement that proves everything." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that cut through the corporate pretense. "He hid it somewhere in this building. He left me clues, a series of puzzles in his old notes. I've spent years solving them, but I could never access the final location because it's in a high-security area. Tonight's system failure was the first chance I've ever had to get inside." The intercom on Rachel's desk buzzed harshly, breaking the moment. "Ms. Davis," her assistant's strained voice announced, "Mr. Keating is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Rachel hesitated only briefly. "Let him in." She gave David a warning glance. Not a word. The office door swept open and Michael stormed in, his face flushed with barely contained rage. He stopped short when he saw David still sitting there, and his expression twisted with contempt. "Why is he still here?" Michael demanded, jabbing a finger at David. "He should have been escorted out an hour ago." "He is here," Rachel replied, standing to her full height, "because I am not yet satisfied with his report on the system failure. His contract is not terminated." Michael's laugh was sharp and ugly. "His contract, the man is a con artist, Rachel." He threw a thin file onto her desk. "I had security run a background check. David Walker, a string of failed repair businesses, mountains of medical debt." He sneered. "And would you look at that? A daughter with a pre-existing condition so severe no insurance will touch her. He's desperate. He probably sabotaged our system himself to get in here with this sob story about his long-lost father." The accusation was calculated to sound plausible, the exact story a board of directors might believe. David's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, following Rachel's lead. Rachel didn't even glance at the file. "Are you suggesting that a freelance repairman somehow bypassed 30 years of security protocols to trigger a hidden flaw that none of our in-house experts even knew existed? All for a payday he had no guarantee of getting?" She picked up the file between two fingers as if it were contaminated. "Your desperation is showing, Michael." "My desperation," Michael shot back. "I'm trying to protect this company, our father's company, from an obvious grifter. He's playing on your sympathy, Rachel. This is a shakedown, plain and simple." Michael straightened his tie, regaining his corporate composure. "I'm instituting a full security review of the entire building, starting with the sublevels. New protocols, new access codes, biometric scanners on all sensitive areas, including the cornerstone server room. It's my job as COO to mitigate threats, and right now he is the biggest threat we face." The threat was clear. Michael was going to lock down the building, making it impossible for them to search for whatever proof Robert Walker might have hidden. He was putting the final piece of the puzzle, and Emily's last hope, permanently out of reach. Rachel walked around her desk until she was standing directly in front of him. "You will do nothing of the sort without my written approval. This company has one leader, Michael, and it isn't you. Now get out of my office." The sheer force of her command made Michael take an involuntary step back. They were locked in a silent battle of wills, COO versus CEO, the culmination of a power struggle that had been brewing for years. With a final venomous glare at David, Michael turned and left, the office doors closing with a soft hiss behind him. The room was quiet again, but the confrontation had changed everything. The threat was no longer a ghost from the past. It was a living, breathing enemy, and he was on high alert. "He's going to bury it," David said, his voice grim. "Whatever proof is in that room, he'll find a way to destroy it before we can reach it." "Not if we get there first." Rachel's mind was already working, doubt and hesitation replaced by cold resolve. Michael's panicked, aggressive reaction had been the final piece of evidence she needed. He knew something. Her father might have known something too. She pulled up the building security schematics on her monitor. He mentioned a security review. That means he'll have to file a work order. It will take him at least 24 hours to get authorization and bring in a team. She looked at David, a new fire in her eyes. That gives us a window. Tonight. David stared at her in disbelief. He had come expecting a fight, a dismissal, maybe a small settlement if he was lucky. He hadn't expected an ally, let alone the CEO herself. We go back down to the cornerstone after the night shift has settled in, she continued, thinking aloud. My executive override can bypass most internal security. Your father's clue mentioned an architect's signature. My father was a frustrated architect before he built this company. He personally designed the layout of that server room. If there's a secret, I'm the one most likely to recognize it. She turned her monitor towards him, displaying a detailed blueprint of the server room. We have one night to find a 30-year-old document in a room full of ghosts. Her expression showed a mixture of determination and clear understanding of the risk they were about to take. Are you ready? The drive home was a blur for David. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he had long since buried hope. It was dangerous, fragile, almost painful in its intensity. He let himself into his small apartment, the lights dimmed, and the only sound the soft hum of Emily's oxygen concentrator. Mrs. Gable, the kind elderly woman from next door who watched Emily in the evenings, was dozing in an armchair, a half-finished knitting project in her lap. She stirred as he entered. Oh, David, you're late. Is everything all right? Just a complicated job, Carol, he said, forcing a reassuring smile. How is she? She was a bit tired today, but she ate well. She drew you a picture. Mrs. Gable pointed to a paper on the small kitchen table. It was a crayon drawing of a smiling man with a toolbox standing next to a little girl with an impossibly long ponytail. Above them, a bright yellow sun shone down. David felt the familiar ache in his chest, a mixture of profound love and gut-wrenching fear. This was why he was doing this, for more days under that yellow sun. After thanking Mrs. Gable and seeing her to the door, David quietly pushed open Emily's bedroom door. She was asleep, her small face peaceful in the soft glow of her rocket ship nightlight. He could hear the faint whistle of her breathing, a sound that was both comforting and a constant, terrifying reminder of the clock that was always ticking for her. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his fingers trembling slightly. He was about to declare war on one of the most powerful men in the city, with the CEO of a billion-dollar company as his only uncertain ally. The odds were impossible. But looking at Emily, he knew he had no other choice. I'll fix this, sweetie, he whispered. I promise. 2 hours later, he stood in the shadow of the towering Summit Technologies headquarters, the building a sleeping giant in the night. A black town car with tinted windows pulled silently to the curb. The back door opened. Rachel had changed out of her CEO's suit into a simple black turtleneck and slacks. She looked less like an executive and more like someone prepared for covert operations. Get in, she said, her voice low but commanding. They drove to a private underground parking entrance, the gate rolling up and sealing behind them with a heavy thud. The silence of the empty garage was absolute. The night security team sticks to a strict patrol schedule, Rachel explained as they walked toward a service elevator. Her voice was steady, but David could see the tension in her posture. They sweep the sub-levels at the top of every hour. It's 11:40 now. That gives us until midnight to get into the room, and another hour after that before their next pass. She swiped her key card and a small panel lit up green. Executive override. It logs my entry, but it won't trigger an alert unless I access a restricted area like R&D or Treasury. She glanced at him. As far as the system is concerned, I'm just working late. They rode the elevator down in silence, the air thick with unspoken fears. When the doors opened to the sub-level, the corridor was deserted and bathed in the eerie, low-power lighting of the night cycle. The server room, the cornerstone as it was called, was at the end of the hall. Rachel swiped her card again, and the heavy door hissed open. Inside the room was cold and quiet. The angry whine of the dying servers had been replaced by a calm, steady hum. It felt less like a crime scene now and more like a crypt. The architect's signature, Rachel murmured, her eyes scanning the room. My father was a perfectionist, obsessive about details. Everything had to be symmetrical balanced. If something is out of place in here, he's the one who put it there. They began their search, moving with quiet urgency. They examined floor panels, ceiling tiles, the server racks. David consulted a copy of the blueprint Rachel had printed, cross-referencing it with his father's notes. Everything seemed perfect, exactly as it appeared on the schematic. There were no hidden panels, no secret switches. Frustration began to set in. "Maybe I was wrong," David said, his voice laced with defeat. "Maybe the clue meant something else entirely." "No," Rachel said, her gaze fixed on the far wall. "You were right. I've just been blind." She walked toward a small, polished brass plaque mounted on the concrete. It was a dedication plaque, the kind found in any corporate building. Summit Technologies, founding partners, James Davis and William Keating. Building tomorrow today. "I've seen this plaque 100 times, Rachel said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's been here since the beginning. A monument to the official story." "What about it?" David asked, moving to her side. "Look at it," she urged. "It's crooked." David looked closer. She was right. The plaque was off by a single, almost imperceptible degree. To anyone else, it would be a minor construction flaw, but to Rachel, who knew her father's obsession with perfect alignment, it was a glaring anomaly. It was an intentional flaw. It was the signature. Rachel ran her fingers along the edge of the metal. He would never, ever have allowed this unless David was already at her side, pulling a thin, flexible feeler gauge from his toolbox. He slid it carefully into the tiny gap between the plaque and the wall, probing gently. His eyes widened. "There's a release pin on the top right corner." Using a magnetic probe from his toolbox, he pressed the hidden pin. There was a soft metallic click, and the plaque swung offshore on a hidden hinge, revealing a square cavity in the concrete wall. Embedded within it was a small, dark gray safe, operated not by a key, but by a numbered dial, a combination lock. They stared at it, a wave of triumph immediately crashing against a wall of fresh despair. They had found the secret chamber, the hiding place, but it was still locked. The one piece of evidence that could save Emily and reclaim his family's honor was right there, inches away, but it might as well have been on the moon. Rachel let out a shaky breath, her hope faltering. "A combination, of course it is. And there's no way to know the code." David looked from the lock back to his toolbox. He thought of his father's words about the key, about the threat that only his son could stop. The threat wasn't just the kill switch. It was this. It was all of this. He looked at the safe, then at Rachel, a slow dawning realization in his eyes. "Maybe we do," he said. "What are you talking about?" Rachel whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of hope and fear. "How could we possibly know the combination?" David's gaze was fixed on the dial, but his mind was elsewhere, back in the pages of his father's journal. "My father was a creature of logic and sentiment all at once," he began thinking aloud. "He wouldn't have used a birthday or a random number. It would be something meaningful, something that represented the soul of his work, a number that was both a signature and a foundation." He turned to face her, his eyes alight with sudden energy. In his notes, there's a patent number he circled over and over again. It's the patent for the original magnetic core processor, the invention that started everything. He called it his Genesis patent. "I always thought he was just proud of it, but what if it was more? What if it's the key?" Rachel's breath hitched. She knew the patent he was talking about. It was officially registered under the names Davis and Keating. But company legend, the whispered history among the old engineers, had always hinted at a third unnamed genius. "Patent number 31857, she recited from memory. "It was the bedrock of our company." 6 digits, David said, his voice barely audible. He stepped up to the safe, his hand hovering over the dial. "My father always said the most important things should be hidden right out in the open." His fingers, usually so steady, trembled as he gripped the cold metal wheel. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic clicks of the tumblers as he turned the dial right to 3, then left past 1 to 8, right to left to 7. He took one final shaky breath and pulled the handle. The safe was silent for a moment, and David's heart sank. Then with a low, heavy thunk, the thick steel bolt retracted. The door swung open. They stared into the dark cavity, their breath held. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single thin leather folder. It was perfectly preserved, untouched by the 30 years that had passed around it. David reached in with a reverent hand and lifted it out. He placed it on top of a server cabinet and opened it. On top lay a single sheet of paper, a document that had once been a common diner napkin, now yellowed with age but protected by a plastic sleeve. On it, in faded blue ink, were the terms of a partnership dividing a new unnamed company three ways. Below the terms were three signatures: a bold, confident James Davis, a sharp, angular William Keating, and a fluid, elegant Robert Walker. It was real. It was the smoking gun. He kept it, Rachel whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, earth-shattering validation. The lie was real, which meant the truth was too. Beneath the napkin was the formal, notarized partnership agreement, stating in clear legal terms the equal one-third ownership of Robert Walker. But there was something else tucked into the folder. A small, sealed envelope made of thick, cream-colored paper. Written on the front in unfamiliar handwriting was a single word: James, an unopened letter to her father. Before either of them could process the meaning of this new discovery, a sound from the hallway shattered the moment. A keycard swiped. The lock on the cornerstone's door clicked open. They froze, eyes wide with panic. The security sweep was an hour early, but it wasn't the blue uniformed security guards who stepped into the room. It was Michael Keating, and he was not alone. Flanking him were two large men in dark suits, their faces hard and impassive. They were not company security. Michael's eyes immediately fell on the open safe, then to the documents in David's hands. A slow, triumphant, and utterly terrifying smile spread across his face. The mask was off. The cornered executive was gone, replaced by a predator who had just trapped his prey. "I knew it," Michael said, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. "I just knew you couldn't resist. Did you really think I wouldn't have a private security feed in the one room that holds my family's biggest secret?" Michael shook his head in mock pity. "My father may have been a monster, Rachel, but he wasn't stupid, and neither am I." The leather folder containing 30 years of buried truth felt impossibly heavy in David's hands. He instinctively moved it behind him, though the gesture was futile. The evidence was exposed, the safe was open, and Michael's private security team blocked the only exit. "What is this, Michael?" Rachel stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of David. Her CEO voice had returned sharp with authority, despite their compromised position. "These men are not authorized security personnel. Get them out of my building immediately." "Your building?" Michael's laugh was cold, empty of anything resembling humor. "As of 20 minutes ago, I called an emergency meeting of the board. I informed them that you were found in a secure area after hours with an unauthorized civilian attempting to access corporate archives." His smile widened, revealing the predator beneath the corporate veneer. "I suggested you were having a mental breakdown brought on by stress, that you've become a liability to the company's stability." The echo of Robert Walker's fate 3 decades earlier hung in the air between them, history repeating itself with cruel precision. "They voted to place me in temporary command of the company pending a full investigation of your fitness to lead." Michael gestured toward the folder in David's hands. "Now hand over my property." "You won't get away with this." David's voice remained steady despite the hammering of his heart against his ribs. He carefully slid the documents back into the leather folder. "Get away with it." Michael's laugh was sharper, this time edged with genuine amusement. "I already have. You have a piece of paper. I have a board of directors, a billion-dollar legal team, and possession of this room." He nodded to his men. "Get the folder." One of the large men started moving toward them. David took a step back, shielding the folder with his body. Rachel remained rooted in place, her mind racing, searching for an angle, a weakness, an escape route. There was none. They were trapped. "You really should have left the ghosts alone, Rachel." Michael's voice dropped to a menacing whisper as he pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. The heavy reinforced door to the server room hissed shut with a resounding thud. A series of magnetic locks engaged, sealing them in. "Now," Michael said, his smile vanishing, replaced by a look of cold finality, "you're going to give me my folder." The air in the sealed room grew thick with tension. The hum of the servers seemed to fade into the background, overwhelmed by the sound of David's own ragged breathing. Michael's men began to close in their movements, deliberate, professional. They were not here to negotiate. The folder, Walker, Michael repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Give it to me, and I'll make sure the board is lenient. A generous severance for Rachel, for you. He paused, the words carefully chosen. I'll pay for your daughter's treatment, all of it. A private donation. No one ever has to know. It was a tempting offer, a lifeline. The one thing he wanted most in the world handed to him in exchange for his silence. David's eyes flickered to Rachel. He saw the fire in her gaze, the unbending will that refused to bow to a cheap threat. He thought of his father, broken and erased. He thought of Emily and what kind of man he wanted her to have for a father, a man who sold his soul or a man who fought. What's in the letter, Michael? Rachel's voice cut through the tension, a sharp blade of defiance. She was looking at the small, cream-colored envelope in David's hand, the one addressed to her father. You've seen what's inside, haven't you? That's what you're really afraid of. Not the contract, the truth. Michael's smile tightened, a micro-expression of discomfort flashing across his features. Ancient history, the ramblings of a failed man. Then let me read it, Rachel challenged, taking a step toward him. If it's nothing, it's nothing. But you won't allow that, will you? Because it proves my father wasn't the monster. Yours was, and my father was a coward who went along with it. The barb hit its mark. A flash of raw fury crossed Michael's face, momentarily cracking his controlled facade. He was weak. They both were. They didn't have the vision, the guts to do what was necessary. He dropped all pretense of civility. Enough games. Take it from them. The first man lunged. He was fast, but David was faster. In one fluid motion, he spun around, not to fight, but to act. He slammed his hand onto a large red emergency button on the server cabinet's control panel. It wasn't the kill switch. It was the fire suppression system override. Immediately, a deafening klaxon began to scream. Strobing emergency lights bathed the room in a nauseating red glare. But David hadn't triggered the gas release. He had activated the manual charge sequence, a pre-release warning designed to be unbearably loud. Simultaneously, he jammed a custom-made tool from his pocket, a circuit spanner, into the magnetic lock's power conduit. Sparks flew. The heavy thud of the locks disengaging was lost in the shrieking alarm. They were no longer sealed in, but the door was still blocked by two very large problems. The guards were momentarily stunned by the sensory assault. In that split second of confusion, David grabbed Rachel's arm. This way? He didn't run for the door. He ran toward the back of the room, pulling her with him to a large grated ventilation shaft near the floor. My father had his own back door, he yelled over the klaxon. He jammed his fingers into the edge of the grate and pulled. It was heavy, but it was on hinges. As he wrenched it open, one of Michael's men recovered, shaking his head to clear it, and charged. Rachel, go! David shoved the folder into her hands and turned to face the oncoming threat. He couldn't fight the man head-on, so he used the only weapon he had, his toolbox. He swung the heavy rust-pitted box in a wide arc, aiming low. It connected with the man's knee with a sickening crunch. The man roared in pain and stumbled, his charge broken. The second guard was already on them. Rachel, seeing David grappling with the first man, acted on pure instinct. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and blasted the second guard in the face with a thick cloud of CO2. He staggered back, sputtering and blinded. David, now, she screamed. David scrambled back, diving headfirst into the dark, narrow opening of the vent. Rachel was right behind him, crawling into the dusty, claustrophobic darkness, just as Michael and his recovering men reached the back wall. Seal the building! Michael's voice roared from the server room, distorted and furious. They're in the service tunnels. Find them. They crawled as fast as they could, the sound of the klaxon fading behind them, replaced by the scrape of their clothes on metal in their own panicked gasps for air. The duct was tight and smelled of dust and decay. After 20 yards, it opened into a larger service corridor, a concrete artery running through the bones of the building. They tumbled out, covered in grime hearts pounding. They were free of the room, but they were fugitives in a building controlled by their enemy. Rachel leaned against the cold concrete wall, trying to catch her breath. She clutched the precious leather folder to her chest. He's locked down the building. We're still trapped. He can lock the main doors, David said, his mind already working. But this place is a maze. My father's notes, he had maps of these tunnels. There are ways out that aren't on any official records. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he tried to turn on the flashlight. The screen lit up, showing a dozen missed calls from Mrs. Gable. A fresh wave of fear washed over him. "We need to call the police," Rachel said, pulling out her own phone. She had a signal faint but there. "And tell them what?" David countered, his voice grim. "The acting CEO has just reported that the former CEO is having a psychotic episode and is running around the basement with a repairman. Who do you think they'll believe? The awful truth of Hindbar's hitter. Michael hadn't just trapped them physically. He had built a cage of lies around them. He controlled the building, he controlled the board, and right now he controlled the narrative. They could walk out the front door with the proof in their hands, and Michael would have them arrested or committed before they could say a word to anyone who mattered." From far down the corridor, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps and shouting. Michael's men were in the tunnels. They were hunting. Rachel looked at the folder in her hands, then at David. The document that was supposed to be their salvation had become the very thing that could get them killed. "This is worthless," she whispered, the reality of their situation crashing down on her, "if we can't get it to someone who will believe us." The sound of footsteps receded down a parallel corridor, and they were left in the suffocating darkness, the silence broken only by their own breathing. Rachel leaned against the grimy concrete wall, the leather folder a cold, heavy weight in her hands. "He's right," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "We're ghosts. We have the truth, but we're trapped outside of reality. No one will listen." David was thinking, his mind racing through the fragments of his father's notes, through the stories of the old days, looking for an anchor, a piece of the past that Michael couldn't control. "The board," he said suddenly. "Michael said he has their support, but a board is never a monolith. There's always someone who remembers." Rachel's head snapped up. An image flashed in her mind, a man with kind, weary eyes and a handshake as firm as oak. "Joseph," she breathed. "Joseph Reynolds." "Who's that?" "The senior board member. He's been there since the beginning. He was my father's oldest friend, the company's first legal counsel. He's retired from day-to-day operations, but he holds the swing vote on any major decision." She paused, a new complication dawning on her. "He also revered my father. He'll never believe this story without absolute, irrefutable proof." "We have it," David said, gesturing to the folder. "We just have to get it to him." That was the problem. They couldn't email it, it would be intercepted. They couldn't call him and expect him to believe a wild story from a CEO who had just been painted as unstable. They had to get to him in person with the folder in their hands. And to do that, they had to get out of the building. "Follow me," David said, a newfound purpose in his voice. "My father's maps." He led her through the labyrinthine tunnels, relying on a memory of blueprints he had studied for years. It was a strange, ghostly pilgrimage. They passed humming electrical junctions and vast, silent water pipes. Twice they had to press themselves into darkened alcoves as the beams of flashlights from Michael's search parties swept past the gruff voices of the men echoing ominously in the concrete passages. During one of these tense waits, huddled together in the dark, Rachel's fingers brushed against the sealed envelope in the folder. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to know. Using the light from her phone, she carefully broke the 30-year-old wax seal. The paper inside was thick and unfolded with a soft crackle. The handwriting was the same as the signature on the napkin, elegant, precise, the script of a genius. "James," it began. "If you are reading this, it means William has won and you have let him. I am writing this not to curse you, but to beg you to remember the man you were when we sketched our dreams on a napkin. We were going to change the world, you and I. William was only ever interested in owning it. He is a shark, James. He sees my work as property and your friendship as leverage. He will not stop with me. Once he has full control, his greed will consume everything, including the integrity of the work itself. I know you are a good man, but you are afraid. You are afraid of losing what we've built. So you are letting him poison the foundations to save the walls, but the walls will crumble. I have built a fail-safe into the cornerstone, a final switch to protect my legacy from being corrupted. I pray my son never has to use it. I pray he finds a better man in charge, a leader who remembers the dream. Don't let William do this. Don't let him turn our dream into a monster. Don't make my son clean up our mess. Your friend Robert." Rachel finished reading, her vision blurred by tears. The letter wasn't a condemnation of her father. It was a desperate appeal to his better nature. It painted him not as a villain, but as a tragic, weak figure who stood by and allowed a crime to happen out of fear. The guilt was still there, but now it was mingled with a profound sense of sorrow. Robert Walker hadn't just been a partner. He had been her father's friend, his conscience, and her father had silenced him. She now knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about justice for David or reclaiming a legacy. It was about redemption for her father, for the company, for herself. She looked at David, her eyes shining with a new unbreakable resolve. "Let's get out of here." He led them to the deepest part of the substructure, to a wall of old brick that looked different from the surrounding concrete. It was the original foundation of the building. Tucked away behind a rusted electrical panel was a heavy iron wheel, an old service access for the original city subway lines, David explained. It was sealed off in the 70s. My father knew they'd never think to look here. Together they put their shoulders into the wheel. It groaned in protest, stiff from decades of disuse. With a final agonizing effort, it turned. A low section of the brick wall receded into the foundation, revealing a dark, cavernous tunnel filled with the smell of damp earth and cold stone. They scrambled through, and David pulled the heavy door shut behind them. They were plunged into absolute darkness, the sounds of their pursuers finally gone. Using their phone flashlights, they navigated the abandoned subway tunnel for what felt like miles. Finally, they saw a rusted ladder leading up to a manhole cover. With a grunt, David pushed it open, and they were met with the cool, damp air of the city night. They emerged into a deserted alleyway, streaks of grime on their faces and clothes. Above them, the Summit Technologies Tower loomed against the night sky, its lights blazing. It looked like a monument, a tombstone for a 30-year-old lie. They were free from the prison, but they were more exposed than ever. Rachel took out her phone. There was only one chance, one call she could make where her word might still mean something. She found the number in her contacts, a private line she had only ever used for emergencies. She pressed the button. It rang twice. "Reynolds." The voice that answered was gravelly with sleep. "Joseph, it's Rachel Davis. I'm in trouble. I need your help." She took a deep breath, the cold night air stinging her lungs. "It's about my father and Robert Walker." There was a long, static-filled silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, Rachel thought he had hung up. Then Joseph Reynolds' voice returned, no longer sleepy, but sharp and alert as a hawk. "Robert Walker. Rachel, what is this? Where are you?" "I can't explain over the phone." Rachel's voice was tight with urgency. "Joseph, I know this sounds insane, but I am in terrible trouble, and you are the only person I can trust. Michael has seized control of the company." Another pause. She could almost hear the old man's mind working, processing the impossible. "My study," he said finally, his voice a low command. "Use the garden entrance. Don't talk to anyone. And bring Robert Walker with you." He hung up before she could tell him Robert was dead. As they flagged down a taxi, David checked his phone again. The missed calls from Mrs. Gable had doubled. His thumb hovered over the call button, torn between two urgent necessities. Rachel saw his hesitation. "Call her," she said firmly. "Whatever is happening with your daughter, it matters more than this right now." David's hands trembled as he pressed the call button. "Carol, what's wrong? Is Emily okay?" The conversation that followed was brief, but the effect on David was devastating. His face drained of color. When he hung up, he looked at Rachel with eyes hollow with fear. "Emily's in the hospital. She had an acute lung infection. They've got her stabilized, but—" His voice broke. "I need to go to her." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Give me the address. We'll go there first." "No." David shook his head firmly. "Joseph Reynolds won't wait forever. Michael is moving fast. You take this to Joseph." He handed her the folder. "I'll go to Emily." "David, you've waited 30 years for this moment. This is your father's vindication, your daughter's future. And none of it matters if she doesn't make it through tonight." His voice was quiet but resolute. "My father would understand. He would want me with his granddaughter." Rachel saw in his eyes the same uncompromising love her own father had once shown for her. She nodded, accepting his decision. "I'll take it to Joseph. I'll make him believe." They parted at the next corner, David heading to Beth Israel Hospital, while Rachel continued to Joseph Reynolds' brownstone in the historic district. As their taxi pulled away, neither noticed the black SUV that had been parked half a block behind them. its engine starting as it began to follow David's cab. Beth Israel Hospital's emergency room was a chaos of beeping monitors and hushed urgent conversations. David burst through the doors, his heart in his throat. He found Mrs. Gable in the waiting area, her kind face drawn with worry. "Where is she?" David's voice cracked with fear. "Pediatric intensive care, 4th floor. They only let me stay with her because you weren't answering." "David, I'm so sorry. It happened so fast." David was already running to the elevators, leaving Mrs. Gable's apologies hanging in the air. The elevator seemed to crawl upward each second an eternity. When the doors finally opened, he sprinted down the corridor, skidding to a halt at the nurse's station. "Emily Walker," he gasped. "My daughter, where is she?" A nurse looked up, her expression softening with recognition. "Mr. Walker, we've been trying to reach you. She's in room 412, but—" David didn't wait for her to finish. He pushed through the door to find his daughter looking impossibly small in the hospital bed, her skin pale against the white sheets. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that monitored every aspect of her fragile existence. Her breathing was labored despite the oxygen mask covering her face. A doctor stood beside her bed checking her vitals. He looked up as David entered. "Mr. Walker, I'm Dr. Patel. Your daughter is stable for now, but her condition is serious. The infection has compromised her already weakened lungs." "Will she—" David couldn't finish the sentence, the word "die" sticking in his throat. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Patel said, the practiced neutrality of his tone failing to mask the gravity of the situation. "The next 24 hours will be critical. She needs more aggressive treatment than what we can provide here. There's an experimental protocol at Boston Children's that would be ideal for her case, but—" He hesitated, the unspoken issue of cost hanging in the air. David sank into the chair beside Emily's bed, taking her small hand in his, the hand that had just hours ago drawn a picture of them standing in the sunshine. "I'll get the money, Bo," he whispered, more to Emily than to the doctor. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Patel nodded, though his expression showed he'd heard such desperate promises before. "I'll be back to check on her in an hour. Press the call button if anything changes." Left alone with his daughter, David felt a crushing weight of helplessness. The folder, the evidence, his father's legacy, none of it would matter if he lost Emily. Yet without the justice that folder represented, he might not be able to save her. He was so absorbed in his vigil that he didn't notice the door opening behind him. He didn't see the 2 men in dark suits enter until they were standing on either side of his chair. "Mr. Walker," a smooth voice spoke from the doorway. What a terrible situation. David looked up to find Michael Keating standing there, his expression a perfect mask of corporate concern. "I'm so sorry about your little girl. Cystic fibrosis is such a cruel disease." "Get out," David growled, rising to his feet. "You have no right to be here." "On the contrary," Michael smiled, closing the door behind him. "As acting CEO, I have a responsibility to ensure Summit Technologies maintains good community relations, especially with the families of our contractors." The threat was implicit in every word. The 2 men flanking David weren't there for protection, they were there for control. Michael approached Emily's bed, looking down at her with calculated sympathy. "Such a brave little fighter. It would be a tragedy if she didn't get the care she needs. If you touch her—" "Please," Michael raised a hand in mock offense. "I'm here to help. Boston Children's Hospital has one of the best pediatric CF units in the country. Their gene therapy program is groundbreaking. The wait list is long, but—" He shrugged. "Influence can open many doors." David stared at him, a hatred warring with desperate hope for his daughter's life. "What do you want?" "I am. The same thing I wanted an hour ago. The folder, the contract, the letter, everything you took from the safe." Michael's voice hardened. "Rachel Davis is on her way to meet Joseph Reynolds. I want you to call her, tell her you've changed your mind, and arrange to meet. My men will accompany you. And if I refuse," Michael looked down at Emily again, "then you'll have to hope that standard treatment is enough, and that your current insurance covers extended ICU stays." He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "It's a simple choice, really. Your father's reputation or your daughter's life. What's it going to be?" Meanwhile, across town, Joseph Reynolds' brownstone stood dignified and silent on a tree-lined street. As instructed, Rachel entered through the garden gate, following a stone path to a private entrance at the rear of the house. Joseph Reynolds, tall, despite his 78 years, with a shock of white hair and a face carved from granite, waited for her at the door. His sharp eyes took in her disheveled appearance, the grime on her clothes, the exhaustion in her face. "You look like hell, Rachel," he said by way of greeting, ushering her inside. "Where's Walker?" "At the hospital. His daughter is ill," Rachel explained as they entered his study, a fortress of old leather and dark wood lined with thousands of books. It smelled of history and privilege. "Walker? You mean Roberts?" "His son David. Robert died years ago." Rachel's words hung in the air between them. Joseph's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old grief quickly suppressed. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a leather chair by the fireplace. "Michael Keating called me an hour ago. He told me a story about a corporate saboteur and a CEO who has lost her mind. He's calling an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. to have you formally removed." He handed her a glass of water, his eyes boring into hers. "Now you're going to tell me your story, and it had better be good." Rachel placed the leather folder on the antique desk between them. "It's not my story, Joseph. It's the truth my father helped bury 30 years ago." Slowly, methodically, she laid it all out. The system failure that had brought David to Summit Technologies. The discovery of the third founder. The hidden safe. The documents that rewrote the company's history. Joseph listened, his expression unreadable, his fingers steepled before him. He examined each document under his desk lamp, his eyes accustomed to scrutinizing contracts for loopholes, missing nothing. He saw the three signatures names that had defined his own youth. He saw the truth of the paper, the ink. "I always wondered," he said softly, almost to himself. "James was never the same afterward. After William took full control, your father became haunted. I thought it was just the pressure of success." He looked up at Rachel, his face a mask of conflict. "This is a 30-year-old document. Michael's lawyers will call it a forgery. They'll bury you in the memory of Robert Walker in legal fees and slander. It's not enough." This was the moment. Rachel took the cream-colored envelope from the folder, her hand trembling slightly as she slid it across the desk. "This is," she said. "It was sealed until tonight. We found it with the contract. It's from Robert to my father." Joseph stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. With a heavy sigh, he picked it up and read the letter that had already shaken Rachel's world. As he read, the impassive mask crumbled. The lines on his face deepened. His jaw tightened. By the time he reached the final heartbreaking sign-off, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. He had not just read a letter. He had heard the voice of a dead friend crying out from the grave. He gently placed the letter on the desk, his movements slow and heavy, with the weight of a lifetime of misplaced loyalty. He looked at Rachel, his expression full of a new terrible understanding. "Your father was a good man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But he was a coward." "And William Keating?" Rachel asked quietly. "William was a wolf," Joseph's voice hardened. "I helped them build a sheepfold, and I never realized a wolf was already inside." At that exact moment, Rachel's phone rang. It was David. She answered immediately, worry creasing her brow. "David, how's Emily?" The voice that replied sounded strained different. "She's stable. Listen, Rachel, I've been thinking. We should meet, compare notes before you do anything with those documents." Something in his tone set off alarm bells in Rachel's mind. "Where are you now?" "Still at Beth Israel. Could you come here? There's a coffee shop across the street." Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. David would never leave Emily's side right now, not even to cross the street. And he would never use such a businesslike tone when discussing his critically ill daughter. Someone was listening to this call. "Of course," she said smoothly, meeting Joseph's concerned gaze. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. As soon as she hung up, she turned to Joseph. "Michael has him. He's using his daughter as leverage." Joseph didn't waste a second on shock or disbelief. He moved to his desk with the efficiency of a man half his age pressing a button on his phone. "Henry, bring the car around and call Edwards. Tell him it's the scenario we discussed. Authorization code Orpheus." Rachel looked at him in surprise. "What are you doing?" "Activating a contingency plan I should have put in place 30 years ago." Joseph's voice was grim with purpose. "Michael's not just William's son, Rachel. He's William's creature, and I've watched him long enough to know his methods. You don't seem surprised by any of this, Rachel said, sudden suspicion coloring her voice. Joseph paused, a shadow of old guilt crossing his features. I suspected. For years I suspected something was wrong with the Robert Walker situation. But I trusted James. I trusted my friend over my instincts. His jaw set with determination. I won't make that mistake again. He opened a drawer in his desk and removed a small recording device. We're going to need more than just these documents. We need to get Michael on record. He looked up at Rachel, his eyes hard with resolve. Are you ready to fight dirty, Rachel? Because that's what it will take to win against a Keating. Rachel thought of David's quiet dignity, of Emily's life hanging in the balance of her father's moral failure. I'm ready to fight right, she answered. Whatever it takes. Joseph nodded, a grim smile on his face. Then let's go save your company and Robert Walker's legacy. It's long overdue. Across town, David sat in the hospital cafeteria, Michael's men flanking him like a prisoner. His phone call to Rachel completed, he felt a surge of self-loathing. He had allowed himself to be used as bait, had spoken words that weren't his own. But what choice did he have? Emily's life was at stake. Michael sat across from him, sipping coffee with the relaxed posture of a man who held all the cards. She's coming, David said flatly. Now keep your promise about Emily's treatment. All in good time, Michael smiled. First, we need to retrieve my property. Once I have the folder, I'll make the necessary calls. Emily will have the best care money can buy. Why do you care so much about these documents? David asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his anger. Your father's dead. My father's dead. This is ancient history. Something flickered in Michael's eyes, a brief glimpse of something deeper than mere corporate greed. You think this is about the past. This is about the future. Your father's original designs. He caught himself realizing he had said too much. His smile returned colder than before. Let's just say there's more at stake than you understand. David was about to press further when his phone rang. His heart stuttered when he saw the hospital's internal number on the screen. It's Emily's doctor, he said, already rising. One of Michael's men grabbed his arm. Michael considered him for a moment, then nodded. Take the call, but we're listening. David answered, turning slightly away from the table. Dr. Patel, is she all right? The doctor's voice was low, urgent. Mr. Walker, I need you to come back to Emily's room immediately. There's been a development in her condition. Is she worse? David's voice cracked with fear. Just come now, Dr. Patel said and hung up. David looked at Michael, panic overwhelming his caution. I need to go to my daughter, now. Richards will accompany you, Michael said, nodding to one of his men. Daniels and I will wait for Rachel. Don't try anything heroic, Walker. Remember what's at stake. David hurried back to the pediatric ICU, the security man keeping pace beside him. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Had Emily taken a turn for the worse? Was she slipping away while he sat plotting with her life as a bargaining chip? When they reached Emily's room, Richards positioned himself outside the door. Make it quick, he growled. Mr. Keating wants you back downstairs in 10 minutes. David pushed through the door, prepared for the worst. What he found instead left him momentarily speechless. Dr. Patel stood beside Emily's bed, but he wasn't alone. 2 uniformed police officers and a stern-looking woman in a business suit were also present. Emily was awake, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Mr. Walker, the woman stepped forward, showing him an ID. I'm Special Agent Carmichael, FBI. We need to move your daughter to a secure location immediately. What I don't understand, there isn't time to explain everything, Dr. Patel interjected. These people arrived 20 minutes ago. They say your family is in danger. Agent Carmichael nodded. We have reason to believe your daughter is being used as leverage in an ongoing criminal investigation. We're moving her to a secure medical facility where she'll receive full treatment while under our protection. David's mind reeled. How did you even know? Joseph Reynolds, she replied simply. He's been working with us for months, building a case against Michael Keating. When he called us tonight, we moved immediately. She glanced at the door. Is one of Keating's men outside? David nodded, still struggling to process this sudden shift. What about Rachel Davis? She's walking into a trap. We have a team in place at the cafeteria, Carmichael assured him. But right now we need to get your daughter out of here before Keating realizes what's happening. A young doctor entered with a transport gurney. "The service elevator is clear," he reported. "Security has the route secured." David moved to Emily's side, taking her small hand in his. "Hey, sweetheart, we need to go for a little ride, okay? These people are going to help you feel better." Emily looked up at him, fear and confusion in her eyes. "Daddy, what's happening?" "It's going to be okay," he promised, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." As they carefully transferred Emily to the gurney, Dr. Patel pulled David aside. "The FBI has arranged for her immediate transfer to Boston Children's. They have specialists waiting. Mr. Walker, this is the best possible outcome for Emily medically." David nodded, gratitude momentarily overwhelming his fear. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Patel said with a small smile. "I just made the call I was instructed to make. The rest of this," he gestured to the controlled chaos around them, "is well above my pay grade." A second agent approached them. "We're ready. Walker, you need to come with us. Your testimony will be crucial." "What about the man outside?" David asked, glancing toward the door. Carmichael smiled grimly. "Leave him to us." In the cafeteria, Michael Keating checked his watch with growing impatience. "She should be here by now," he muttered to Daniels. "Call Richards. See what's taking Walker so long." As Daniels reached for his phone, the cafeteria doors opened. Rachel Davis walked in alone, her posture straight and confident despite the grime still streaking her clothes. She spotted Michael immediately and walked directly to his table. "Where's David?" she asked without preamble. Michael gestured to the chair across from him. "Checking on his daughter. He'll be back shortly. Please sit. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Rachel remained standing. "Nothing in that folder belongs to you, Michael. It belongs to history, to the truth." "Always so dramatic," Michael sighed. "The truth is whatever the board decides it is tomorrow morning. And they've already decided." Daniel's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowning. No answer from Richards. Michael's expression tightened. "Try again." As Daniel stepped away to make the call, Rachel smiled, a cold, knowing expression that made Michael's confidence waver for the first time. "Looking for your man upstairs. He's currently being introduced to the FBI agents who are moving Emily Walker to a secure medical facility." Michael's face drained of color. "You're bluffing." "Joseph Reynolds has been working with federal investigators for months, Michael. They've been building a case against you securities, fraud, insider trading, corporate espionage. Tonight just accelerated their timeline." Rachel leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's over." Michael lunged across the table, grabbing Rachel's arm. "Where's the folder?" he hissed. "Right here," Joseph Reynolds' voice cut through the tension. The elderly man stood at the entrance to the cafeteria, flanked by two men in suits who were decidedly not hospital staff. He held up the leather folder. "Looking for this, Mr. Keating." Michael released Rachel's arm, his mask of corporate confidence shattering completely. "Reynolds," he spat, "you senile old fool. You have no idea what you're interfering with." "On the contrary," Joseph replied, walking slowly toward them, "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm correcting a mistake 30 years in the making." Daniels moved toward Michael, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Before he could draw whatever weapon he carried, one of the men with Joseph stepped forward, badge displayed. "Federal agent hands where I can see them." The cafeteria erupted into controlled chaos. Hospital security converged on the scene. Daniels was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Michael, seeing his last chance disappearing, made a desperate lunge for the folder in Joseph's hands. Rachel intercepted him, driving her shoulder into his chest with surprising force. They crashed into a table, sending coffee cups flying. Michael recovered quickly, his face contorted with rage. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, grabbing her throat. "Do you have any idea what's in those designs, what they're worth?" Federal agents pulled Michael off Rachel, forcing him to the ground and cuffing his hands behind his back. As they recited his rights, Michael continued to rant, his composure completely shattered. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I own half the judges in this city." Rachel rubbed her throat, watching as Michael was led away. Joseph came to her side, concern etched on his weathered face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her voice hoarse. "David and Emily?" "Safe," Joseph assured her. "They're on their way to Boston Children's with a federal escort." The Bureau has arranged for Emily to receive the gene therapy she needs. He held up the leather folder. This story is far from over, Rachel. Michael's outburst suggests there's more to Robert Walker's designs than we realize. One battle at a time, Rachel said, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. We still have a board meeting in a few hours. Joseph's expression hardened with determination. And we'll be ready. It's time to rewrite Summit Technologies' history, the true version this time. As dawn broke over the city, the board members of Summit Technologies gathered in the main conference room. The atmosphere was tense, confused. The news of Michael Keating's arrest had spread like wildfire through the corporate grapevine. Rachel Davis sat at the head of the table, Joseph Reynolds at her right hand. The leather folder lay before them, its contents about to change the course of the company forever. Gentlemen, ladies, Rachel began, her voice strong despite the ordeal of the night. Before we proceed, there's something you all need to see. The board members of Summit Technologies shifted uneasily in their seats, exchanging nervous glances as Rachel opened the leather folder. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the rising sun cast long shadows across the gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district. Before we begin, Rachel's voice cut through the tension. I want to acknowledge that the events of last night have created significant confusion. Michael Keating's arrest has undoubtedly been a shock to all of you. Edward Winters, the silver-haired head of the Finance Committee, leaned forward. Rachel, we've received conflicting information. Michael claimed you were having some kind of breakdown, and now he's been arrested by federal agents. We deserve a clear explanation. You deserve the truth, Edward. All of you do. Rachel placed the faded napkin in a clear protective sleeve at the center of the polished conference table. This is the original partnership agreement for Summit Technologies, signed 30 years ago by three men, my father, James Davis, William Keating, and a third founder whose name was deliberately erased from our company's history, Robert Walker. The silence that followed was absolute. 8 pairs of eyes stared at the yellowed napkin with its 3 signatures, the implications slowly rippling through the room. Joseph Reynolds stood, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. As the longest-serving member of this board, and as someone who was present in the early days of this company, I can confirm the authenticity of this document. Robert Walker was indeed the third founder of Summit Technologies. More specifically, he was the chief inventor behind our core technology. Patricia Lee, head of legal affairs, examined the document skeptically. If this is true, where has this evidence been for 30 years, and why is it surfacing now? Because Robert Walker hid it before he was forced out, Rachel explained. Last night, his son David, yes, the repair technician who saved our entire system from collapse, found it in a hidden safe that only someone who knew the original founding fathers would know how to access. Joseph placed the formal, notarized agreement beside the napkin. This is the legal document that followed establishing equal 1/3 ownership among the founders. Note the dates and signatures. They match our corporate archives precisely. Patricia inspected the document with a lawyer's practiced eye. This appears genuine, but it contradicts everything in our official records. Because the official records were altered. Joseph's voice hardened. William Keating and James Davis systematically diluted Robert Walker's ownership through fraudulent means, then removed him completely, rewriting the company's history. Rachel watched the board members' faces, seeing shock gradually give way to calculations of legal liability and public relations nightmares. This isn't just ancient history. Last night's system failure was triggered by a failsafe that Robert Walker built into our core architecture 30 years ago, a dead man's switch he designed to protect his intellectual property. Marcus Chen, the youngest board member and head of technology development, leaned forward. Are you saying our entire system has had this vulnerability for 3 decades? It wasn't a vulnerability, Marcus. It was a deliberate design feature, one that only Robert Walker's son knew how to deactivate. The fact that it triggered now 30 years later deserves investigation. But more importantly, this revelation speaks to a fundamental injustice at the foundation of our company. Patricia shook her head. Rachel, while this is certainly concerning from a historical perspective, the statute of limitations on any contractual dispute from 30 years ago has long expired. I'm not sure what you expect the board to do with this information. This isn't about legal technicalities, Patricia. Rachel's voice took on a steely edge. It's about doing what's right. Robert Walker's son David has a daughter with cystic fibrosis who needs expensive medical treatment. The Walker family has lived in poverty while we've profited from Robert's innovations for decades. Joseph placed a third document on the table, the letter from Robert to James Davis. This letter reveals that Robert Walker knew what was happening. He appealed to James Davis's conscience before he was removed. I suggest you all read it. As the letter made its way around the table, Rachel watched the board members' expressions change. Corporate armor cracked, human emotions shocked, disgust. Sympathy began to show through. There's one more thing you should know, Rachel said, when all had read the letter. Michael Keating wasn't just arrested for securities fraud. According to the FBI, he's been secretly developing military applications based on Robert Walker's original designs applications that were explicitly prohibited in Walker's original patent filings. Marcus Chen's eyebrows shot up. Is that what triggered the federal investigation? It appears so, Joseph confirmed. The Bureau had been building a case against Michael for months. Our discovery of Walker's documents simply accelerated their timeline. Edward Winters removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is an extraordinary situation. If what you're saying is true, Summit Technologies has been built on a foundation of fraud. Not the company itself, Edward, Rachel corrected. The technology was revolutionary. The business model was sound. The fraud was in the ownership structure, a moral failure, not a technological one. Patricia Lee tapped her pen against her legal pad. What exactly are you proposing, Rachel? We can't simply rewrite 30 years of corporate history overnight. Actually, we can, and we must. Rachel straightened her shoulders. I'm proposing 3 immediate actions. First, formal recognition of Robert Walker as a founding partner of Summit Technologies with appropriate amendments to our corporate history and public materials. Second, the issuance of 1/3 of company shares to his heir, David Walker, reflecting what should have been his father's stake. And third, the establishment of the Robert Walker Innovation Center, dedicated to developing his original designs for humanitarian applications, starting with medical technologies for children with conditions like Emily Walker's. The boardroom erupted in a chaos of voices. Edward Winters slammed his hand on the table. Rachel, you're talking about redistributing billions of dollars in company value. The shareholders would revolt. Would they all? Rachel remained calm in the face of his outburst. Or would they respect a company that acknowledges its mistakes and makes them right? This isn't just about money, Edward. It's about who we are as a company, the values we claim to stand for. Joseph Reynolds cleared his throat. I should mention that I've already consulted with our major institutional investors. Once they reviewed the evidence, they expressed support for a reconciliation plan. They understand that getting ahead of this story is better than having it exposed through lengthy public litigation. A calculating look crossed Patricia's face. There would need to be careful messaging, a narrative that positions the company as righting a historical wrong rather than admitting current liability. That's exactly what we'd be doing, Rachel insisted. My father made a terrible mistake. He was weak when he should have been strong. I won't repeat his failure. Marcus Chen, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke. From a technical perspective, I'm curious. If Walker's son knew how to fix our systems when none of our engineers could, perhaps there's more of his father's original design that we've lost or corrupted over the years. Having him involved might actually benefit us technologically. Rachel felt a surge of hope at Marcus's pragmatic approach. Exactly. This isn't just about justice, it's about reclaiming the full potential of Robert Walker's vision. Edward Winters still looked unconvinced. And what about the Keating family's stake? William Keating's widow still owns 15% of this company, which she'll retain, Rachel assured him. We're not seeking punishment. We're seeking balance, the same balance that Robert Walker believed in. 3 equal partners as it was meant to be. Joseph placed a formal resolution document in front of each board member. I've taken the liberty of drafting the necessary resolutions. They require a simple majority vote. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rachel could almost see the calculations happening behind each pair of eyes. Legal implications, financial considerations, public relations angles, personal legacies. I'll remind you all, Joseph said quietly, that the federal investigation into Michael Keating is ongoing. The documents we've discovered will become public record in those proceedings. The question isn't whether this story will emerge, but whether Summit Technologies will be seen as part of the problem or part of the solution. Edward Winters sighed heavily. I move that we vote on the proposed resolutions. I second the motion, Marcus said immediately. Patricia Lee raised a cautionary hand. Before we vote, I think we should be clear about the potential financial impact. This is a significant dilution of existing shareholder value. Is it, Rachel challenged, or is it an investment in our future? Think about it, the son of our original founder just saved our entire system when no one else could. How many other valuable innovations might come from bringing the Walker family back into the fold? Patricia nodded slowly, conceding the point. Put that way, it could actually enhance shareholder value in the long term. All those in favor of recognizing Robert Walker as a founding partner with appropriate amendments to our corporate history. Joseph called for the vote. 8 hands raised without hesitation. All those in favor of issuing 1/3 of company shares to his heir, David Walker. This time there was hesitation. Edward's hand rose slowly, followed by Marcus and 3 others. Patricia Lee's hand remained down along with 2 others, 5-3. A narrow majority, but a majority nonetheless. All those in favor of establishing the Robert Walker Innovation Center. All 8 hands rose. Joseph smiled for the first time that morning. The resolutions pass. Rachel as CEO, the implementation falls to you. Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders, replaced by a new sense of purpose. Thank you. I know this wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Edward Winters closed his portfolio with a sharp snap. I hope you realize the practical challenges ahead. The financial markets will react. Shareholders will have questions. The press will want the whole story. Let them have it, Rachel said with quiet determination. No more secrets. No more lies. Summit Technologies begins a new chapter today, one built on truth and integrity. As the board members filed out, Joseph remained behind with Rachel. When they were alone, his formal demeanor softened. James would be proud of you today, he said gently. Rachel glanced at her father's portrait on the wall. Would he? Or would he be horrified that I exposed his greatest shame? Both, perhaps, but in the end, I think he'd be relieved. Some burdens aren't meant to be carried forever. Joseph gathered the documents carefully back into the folder. Have you spoken to David yet? Not since we parted last night. The FBI has kept me updated on Emily's condition, but I wanted to wait until after the board meeting to call him. He deserves to hear this news from you directly. Joseph handed her the folder. This belongs to the Walker family now. You should be the one to return it. Rachel nodded, taking the leather folder with a sense of ceremony. I'll fly to Boston today. Good. And Rachel? Joseph's weathered face creased in a rare smile. When this is all settled, I'm going to retire. For real this time. I think I've finally fulfilled my obligation to all 3 founders. After Joseph left, Rachel stood alone in the boardroom, watching the morning sun illuminate the city below. For 30 years, Summit Technologies had thrived on a foundation partially built on betrayal. Now they had a chance to rebuild on something stronger, truth, reconciliation, and the full genius of all 3 founders finally working in harmony through their legacies. She picked up her phone and dialed David's number. Boston Children's Hospital gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its modern glass facade a stark contrast to the historic brick buildings surrounding it. Rachel walked through the main entrance, the leather folder tucked securely under her arm. After clearing the enhanced security protocols the FBI had established around Emily's treatment area, she was escorted to a private waiting room. David Walker stood as she entered, his face showing the strain of the past 24 hours. Yet behind the exhaustion, Rachel saw something new in his eyes, a cautious hope. How is she? Rachel asked softly. Better. They started the gene therapy protocol this morning. The doctors say her initial response is promising. David gestured to a chair. The FBI agents told me about Michael's arrest. Did the board meeting happen? Rachel sat down, placing the folder on the table between them. It did. I wanted to tell you the results in person. She opened the folder and slid a document across to him. This is a certified copy of the board resolution. Summit Technologies formally recognizes Robert Walker as a founding partner. Your father's name will be restored to all corporate histories and materials. David stared at the document, his fingers tracing his father's name at the top of the page. I never thought I'd see this day, he whispered. There's more. Rachel handed him a second document. The board has approved the issuance of shares equivalent to 1/3 of the company's total value to you as Robert Walker's heir, effective immediately. David's hand froze above the paper. 1/3, but that would make me a billionaire, yes. Rachel couldn't help a small smile at his shocked expression. There will be tax implications, of course, and you'll need good financial advisors. Joseph Reynolds has recommended some trustworthy people. David shook his head in disbelief. I came looking for justice, maybe some compensation for Emily's treatment. Not this. It's not a gift, David. It's your birthright, what your father should have left you. Rachel placed the original napkin and partnership agreement before him. These belong to you now. I thought you might want to show them to Emily someday, tell her the story of her grandfather. David carefully touched the yellowed napkin, the physical connection to his father overwhelming him for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes glistened. Thank you for believing me, for helping make this right. I had my own ghost to face, Rachel admitted. My father wasn't the monster in this story, but he was complicit. I needed to correct his mistake as much as you needed to reclaim your father's legacy. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse peeked in. Mr. Walker, Emily's asking for you. She's awake. David immediately stood. Would you like to meet her? Rachel hesitated. I wouldn't want to intrude on a family moment. You're part of this story too, David said simply. And besides, Emily loves meeting new people, especially ones who help her dad. Rachel followed David down a short corridor to a private room. Unlike the stark hospital room where Emily had been the previous night, this space had been transformed into something almost homey with colorful murals on the walls and state-of-the-art medical equipment discreetly positioned. Emily sat propped up in bed, her complexion noticeably better than in the photograph Rachel had seen. The nasal cannula remained, but her eyes were bright and alert. A half-finished drawing lay on the tray table before her. Daddy, her face lit up as David entered. The nice doctor said, I'm getting special medicine that's making the sticky stuff in my lungs better. David sat on the edge of the bed, taking her small hand in his. That's right, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Hungry, Emily declared with the straightforward honesty of an 8-year-old. Her gaze shifted to Rachel, curiosity replacing her initial shyness. Who's that lady? This is Miss Davis. Rachel. She's... David paused, searching for words a child might understand. She's helped us get this special medicine for you. Emily studied Rachel with surprising intensity. Are you a doctor too? Rachel moved closer to the bed, smiling. No, I run a company that your grandfather helped build a long time ago. Grandpa Robert. Emily's eyes widened. Daddy has his toolbox. He shows me all the special tools sometimes. Your grandpa was a very smart man, Rachel told her. He invented things that help people all over the world. And now we're going to build a special place where scientists can work on more inventions to help kids like you. Emily considered this with the seriousness only children can muster. Will it have my name on it? David laughed, the sound brightening the sterile hospital room. Maybe a special part of it could. The Emily Walker Pediatric Research Division, Rachel suggested. I think that sounds perfect. Emily beamed, then yawned widely, her brief burst of energy fading. David tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Why don't you rest a bit more? I'll be right here. Promise? Emily's voice was already drowsy. Always, David whispered as her eyelids fluttered closed. They stepped back into the hallway, leaving the door ajar to keep Emily in view. The doctors say she'll need to stay here for at least 2 weeks, David explained. The treatment protocol is intensive at first. Take all the time you need, Rachel assured him. When you are ready to come back to New York, there will be a place for both of you. The company is establishing the Robert Walker Innovation Center. We'd like you to lead it if you are interested. David looked surprised. I'm a repair technician, not a corporate executive. You're an engineer who understands your father's work better than anyone alive. You fixed a system our best people couldn't even diagnose. The position would be technical, not administrative. Rachel paused, choosing her next words carefully. There's something else you should know. The FBI investigation into Michael Keating revealed that he was secretly developing military applications based on your father's designs. David's expression darkened. Military. My father was a pacifist. He specifically restricted his patents to prevent weaponization. Exactly, which is why we want to ensure his legacy is protected going forward. The Innovation Center would focus exclusively on humanitarian applications, medical technology, sustainable energy, environmental remediation, the kind of work your father always intended. Through the doorway, they could see Emily sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "A few days ago, I thought I was going to lose her," David said quietly. "Now she has a future, and suddenly so do I. It's almost too much to process." "Take your time," Rachel advised. "Focus on Emily for now. Everything else can wait." David nodded, his gaze still fixed on his daughter. "There's just one thing I don't understand. What triggered the fail-safe after all these years? My father built it, but he never expected it to activate unless someone deliberately tampered with his core designs." Rachel frowned. "The FBI thinks Michael might have been preparing to move some of the military adaptations into production. He could have been modifying the core architecture in ways that triggered your father's safeguards." "That makes sense," David agreed. "My father was brilliant about contingencies. He built his systems to protect themselves." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. Rachel found herself studying David's profile, seeing echoes of the genius who had helped found her company. There was something compelling about his quiet integrity, his unwavering commitment to his daughter, his connection to Summit's true origins. "I should let you get back to Emily," she said finally. "The company jet will be available whenever you are ready to return to New York." "And David," she hesitated, then continued with genuine feeling, "thank you for forcing us to face the truth. Summit Technologies will be stronger for it." He turned to her, a slight smile softening his features. "My father used to say that any system built on an unstable foundation would eventually collapse. I think he would be pleased to see the foundation being repaired at last." Rachel extended her hand, but David surprised her by pulling her into a brief, warm embrace. "Thank you for believing in ghosts," he whispered before releasing her. As Rachel walked out of the hospital into the fading daylight, she felt lighter than she had in years. The legacy of three founders would finally continue, as it should have 3 decades earlier, in balance, in truth, and in service to something greater than individual ambition. 18 months passed like the turning of seasons. Winter thawing into spring, spring blossoming into summer, summer ripening into fall, and winter returning once more before yielding again to the promise of new beginnings. The grand opening of the Robert Walker Innovation Center coincided with the first anniversary of Summit Technologies' public acknowledgement of its third founder. The modernist building stood on the east side of the Summit campus, its design incorporating elements from all three founders' visions. James Davis's architectural elegance, William Keating's imposing presence, and Robert Walker's ingenious functionality. Rachel stood at the podium on the center's front steps, facing a crowd of employees, press, investors, and invited guests. 30 years ago, a great injustice was committed," she began. "Today, we take another step toward making it right. This center represents not just a correction of history, but a recommitment to the values that all three of our founders originally envisioned: innovation in service of humanity." She gestured to the three names now inscribed in equal prominence above the center's entrance: Davis, Keating, Walker. These names remind us that greatness comes not from individual genius alone, but from partnership, from balance, from the unique strengths that different minds bring to a common purpose. David Walker stepped forward when she beckoned, looking transformed from the worn repair technician who had entered her building 18 months earlier. His clothes were still casual by corporate standards. He had insisted on maintaining his authentic self despite his new wealth and position, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had found his rightful place in the world. "I never knew my grandfather," a clear young voice spoke as Emily Walker joined her father at the podium. Now 10 years old, she stood straight and tall, no oxygen tube in sight. The experimental gene therapy had exceeded all expectations, giving her a normal childhood for the first time in her life. "But my dad says he built things to make people's lives better. That's what I want to do too." The crowd applauded as Emily pressed the ceremonial button that illuminated the building's facade, the three founders' names glowing against the morning sky. "The Robert Walker Innovation Center opens today with 3 major initiatives," David announced. "First, a breakthrough cystic fibrosis treatment protocol that builds on the therapy that saved my daughter's life, now being made available at no cost to families worldwide. Second, an advanced water purification system based on my father's original designs, capable of removing pharmaceutical pollutants from municipal supplies. And third, a sustainable energy storage solution that could make clean power viable for developing communities around the globe. Rachel watched with quiet satisfaction as David continued describing the center's work. In the 18 months since the board's fateful decision, Summit Technologies had not only survived the revelation of its hidden founder, but had thrived. The stock price after an initial dip had risen steadily as investors responded to the company's renewed sense of purpose. The Keating family had weathered its own storm. Michael Keating had accepted a plea deal exchanging a reduced sentence for full cooperation with federal investigators. His mother, William's widow, had publicly distanced herself from his actions while maintaining her stake in the company. The military applications he had been secretly developing were dismantled, their components repurposed for civilian use. Joseph Reynolds stood nearby, leaning more heavily on his cane these days, but still sharp-eyed and attentive. He had officially retired from the board 6 months earlier, but had asked to be present for this moment of culmination. James would be proud, he murmured to Rachel, as they had once before. They all would be. After the ceremony concluded and the crowd began dispersing to tour the new facility, Rachel found herself standing alone with David and Emily near the center's entrance. Emily had already spotted the plaque identifying the Emily Walker Pediatric Research Division and was excitedly showing it to her friends from her new school. "She's thriving," Rachel observed. "It's remarkable to see how far she's come." "The doctors say she's completely stable," David confirmed, watching his daughter with undisguised joy. "She'll always need to be monitored, but she's essentially living a normal life now. I never dared hope for this much." Rachel studied the man beside her, noting how the past 18 months had eased the lines of worry from his face. Their professional relationship had deepened into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. David had thrown himself into the work of the Innovation Center with the same dedication his father had shown, proving himself not just an heir to the Walker legacy, but a visionary in his own right. "The board is extremely pleased with the center's progress," Rachel told him. "Your father's designs were decades ahead of their time. The applications you've developed already justify every penny of investment." David nodded, accepting the praise with characteristic modesty. "It still feels surreal sometimes. 18 months ago, I was fixing refrigerators and HVAC systems, just trying to keep Emily's medical bills paid. Now you're changing the world," Rachel finished for him, "just like your father intended." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched Emily, her laughter carrying across the courtyard. Something had been building between Rachel and David over the months, a connection that transcended their professional collaboration. Neither had acted on it, both focused on their respective responsibilities and on giving Emily stability during her treatment and recovery. "I've been meaning to ask you something," David said, finally turning to face her directly. "The Metropolitan Museum has a new exhibition on technological innovations that change the world. Emily's been studying it in school and she asked if we could go this weekend." He hesitated, then continued with careful casualness. "I thought you might like to join us, if you're free." Rachel felt a warm flutter of anticipation. "I'd like that very much." "Good." David's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that had become increasingly familiar to her. "Emily will be pleased. She's quite fond of you, you know." "The feeling is mutual." Rachel glanced at her watch. "We should go inside. The trustees will be waiting for the official tour." As they walked together into the building that represented both Robert Walker's vindication and Summit Technologies' redemption, Rachel felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The company her father had helped build had lost its way for a time, seduced by greed and ambition. But foundations could be repaired, balances could be restored, and sometimes ghosts from the past could guide the way toward a better future. The main research floor of the Innovation Center hummed with activity, scientists and engineers collaborating, prototype devices being tested, ideas flowing freely in an atmosphere of creative purpose. At the center of the open-plan space stood a glass display case containing Robert Walker's toolbox, positioned where everyone could see it and draw inspiration from the legacy it represented. Emily broke away from her friends and ran back to her father and Rachel. "Can we show them the special room?" she asked, practically bouncing with excitement. David exchanged a glance with Rachel. "I think that's appropriate. After all, it's a day for honoring foundations." They led the small group of dignitaries down a corridor to a specially designed chamber at the heart of the building. Inside, protected behind museum-quality glass, was a simple wooden table. On it lay the original napkin where three young men had sketched their dreams 30 years earlier, preserved for future generations to remember. This is where it all began, David explained to the visitors. Three founders with complementary strengths, united by a vision of technology that could change the world for the better. As the others moved closer to examine the historical artifact, Emily tugged at Rachel's hand. "Dad says Grandpa Robert would have liked you," she whispered. "He says you have the same kind of courage." Rachel squeezed the child's hand gently. "Your grandfather was an extraordinary man. I wish I could have known him." "You kind of do, though," Emily said with a child's simple wisdom. "Through his work, through Dad, through me." Rachel looked across the room at David, who was explaining some technical aspect of his father's original designs to the trustees. When he caught her eye, his explanation faltered for just a moment, a private smile passing between them. "Yes," Rachel agreed softly. "I suppose I do." 2 years after the grand opening, Rachel Davis stood in her office watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber. The view from the top floor of Summit Technologies hadn't changed, but she had. The company had. The world around them had. A gentle knock at her door broke her reverie. David entered dressed more formally than usual in a suit that managed to look both elegant and slightly uncomfortable on his frame. Emily followed resplendent in a navy blue dress, her hair neatly braided. "Are we early?" David checked his watch. "The gala doesn't start for another hour." "Right on time," Rachel assured him, crossing the room to greet them both. "I wanted us to have a moment together before all the ceremonies begin." Tonight marked the culmination of 3 years of transformation for Summit Technologies, the official dedication of a completely redesigned corporate campus that physically embodied the restored three-part legacy of its founders. The original Summit Tower, designed by James Davis, had been joined by two equal structures, the William Keating Business Center and the newly completed Robert Walker Innovation Complex. From above, the three buildings formed a perfect triangle around a central plaza, a physical manifestation of the balance that had finally been restored. "You look beautiful," David said softly, his eyes taking in Rachel's elegant evening gown. "So do you," she replied, straightening his slightly crooked tie with practiced ease. Their relationship had deepened gradually over the past 3 years, moving from professional collaboration to friendship to something much more profound. 6 months earlier, David had moved into Rachel's apartment, creating a new family unit that had brought unexpected joy to all three of them. Emily twirled in her new dress. "Can I go see the model of the campus again, please?" "Of course," Rachel smiled. "It's in the conference room. Just don't touch anything, okay?" As Emily darted out, David moved to stand beside Rachel at the window. 3 years, he mused. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked in here with my father's toolbox. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago." "Both are true in their own way." Rachel leaned against him slightly, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We've accomplished so much in 3 years. The pediatric gene therapy program alone has saved over 200 children worldwide." "My father would be proudest of that," David agreed. "Using technology to heal, not harm. To build, not destroy." Rachel turned to face him directly. "I have something for you, a gift before the gala." She walked to her desk and unlocked a drawer, removing a small velvet box. "This belonged to my father. He received it when Summit went public." She opened the box to reveal a pair of gold cufflinks, each bearing the original company logo, the atom surrounded by a gear. "I had them restored to the original design. I thought you might wear them tonight to honor all three founders." David accepted the box with visible emotion. "Rachel, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything." She helped him fasten the cufflinks, her fingers lingering on his wrists. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what we leave behind. 3 years ago, we set out to correct a historical injustice. But in the process, I think we've created something new, something better than what existed before." David nodded, understanding her meaning perfectly, as he so often did. Balance restored, but also balance improved. The three parts working together more effectively than they ever did in the beginning. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that comes from complete understanding. Outside the window, lights began to illuminate the three buildings that now formed the balanced triangle of Summit Technologies campus. From this height, they could see the central plaza, where hundreds of guests were already gathering for the evening's celebration. Emily burst back into the room, her excitement palpable. The model is amazing. You can see every building and the little people, and even the fountain in the middle. Rachel laughed her heart full as she watched the child who had become such an important part of her life. Are you ready for your big moment tonight? You're still okay with unveiling the plaque? Emily nodded solemnly. I practiced everything you showed me. I won't mess it up. You could never mess up, David assured her, ruffling her neatly braided hair despite her protests. You're a walker. We fix things, remember, we don't break them. Rachel glanced at her watch. We should head down. The trustees will be arriving soon. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Rachel found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From crisis to revelation, from revelation to reconciliation, from reconciliation to renewal. 3 years ago, she had been a solitary figure guarding her father's flawed legacy. Now she stood at the center of something far more meaningful. A family created not by blood, but by choice, by shared values, by common purpose. The elevator doors opened to reveal the soaring lobby of Summit Tower transformed for the evening's gala. The original plaque that had once displayed only 2 founders' names had been replaced years earlier with the accurate 3-founder version. Tonight, a new installation would be unveiled, a tribute to all 3 legacies and the generations who carried them forward. Joseph Reynolds waited for them by the entrance, now retired but still a valued advisor and friend. At 81, he moved more slowly, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. There you are, he greeted them warmly. The guests of honor should not be hiding upstairs on such an important night. We were just having a moment of perspective, Rachel explained, taking his offered arm. Looking at how far we've come. Joseph nodded approvingly. 3 years of hard work and worth every minute. Summit Technologies stands stronger today than ever before. He lowered his voice as they moved toward the exit. The governor has arrived and the mayor is on his way. There's even a rumor that the White House sent a representative, though I haven't confirmed it yet. Outside, the central plaza between the 3 buildings had been transformed into an elegant venue for the evening's festivities. A stage stood at its center, surrounded by tables draped in white linen. Above them, the 3 buildings formed a perfect triangle against the night sky, each illuminated to highlight its distinctive architectural style while emphasizing their harmony as a unified whole. As they made their way through the gathering crowd, Rachel was struck by how many lives had been touched by the changes of the past 3 years. Employees whose jobs had been enriched by the company's renewed sense of purpose. Patients whose health had been restored by the Innovation Center's medical breakthroughs. Communities whose environments had been protected by Summit's sustainable technologies. All of it stemming from a single act of courage, a repair technician with a rusty toolbox forcing a powerful corporation to confront its buried truth. When the time came for the ceremonial unveiling, Rachel took the stage first, welcoming the assembled dignitaries and explaining the significance of the evening. 3 years ago, Summit Technologies rediscovered its complete history. Tonight, we celebrate not just that rediscovery, but the new path it has opened before us. David joined her, his presence beside her, feeling right in a way that transcended professional partnership. The Robert Walker Innovation Center has developed technologies that have already improved millions of lives worldwide, he told the audience. Clean water systems in 12 developing countries, sustainable energy solutions powering rural hospitals, and medical breakthroughs that have given hundreds of children like my daughter a second chance at life. Emily stepped forward on cue, her nervousness visible only to those who knew her well. My grandpa Robert believed that technology should help people, she said clearly, her young voice carrying across the hushed plaza. That's what Summit Technologies does now. It helps people. Together, the 3 of them pulled a cord that unveiled the central monument, a sculpture representing the 3 founding partners, their bronze figures arranged in a circle, each supporting the others in perfect balance. At the base, an inscription read, Davis, Keating, Walker, 3 visionaries, 1 legacy. As applause echoed across the plaza, Rachel felt David's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The past could not be changed, but it could be acknowledged, understood, and ultimately transcended. The ghost had been laid to rest. The foundation had been repaired. And the future built on truth, balance, and shared purpose stretched before them, bright with promise. Emily slipped between them, taking both their hands in hers, completing their circle. Above them, the 3 buildings of Summit Technologies stood in perfect harmony against the night sky, a monument not just to three founders' vision, but to the enduring power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. The truth once buried had finally set them all free.